One of the great sins I know in life, one of the hollow, cold, vacant places in the world came to me early in life. In one of the homes of my youth was what seemed to me a giant, gaping fireplace. Huge, gray stones hewn and rounded by glaciers, scraping over the land that would hold many nations of persons for millennia in the eastern part of the Western continent, were set into the wall around the open space. When we set a fire in that place, the stones would warm and radiate a heat that could chase the chill from our northeastern farmhouse and warm us all against the cold and the winter outside. It was by this blessing that I came to know a sin, an unusable fireplace. Peppered throughout the globe remain these vacant, mocking things of what could be. I know, I'm being dramatic. I have a tendency to do that. But I feel really strongly about this. And only slightly less offensive to me is that middle ground becoming more and more common: gas fireplaces. I understand the need for these things. I get it. They're cleaner, they're more efficient, more controllable. I really do get it. Just seeing the image of flames, actually, even if they are sealed in a chamber, is calming to some people. I promise, I get it. I really, really do. I will always remember one particular fireplace like this, not so much for the mockery it was making of fireplaces, but for what hung over it. In the common room of my seminary, there was a gas fireplace. Of course, we flocked to it in the winter months in Connecticut, trying to stay awake, memorizing the books of the Hebrew scriptures or setting the timelines of religious movements to memory, while the heat tugged wakefulness from us, lulling us into its slumber. It surely wasn't the studying, it was the fire. Watching this all from the high perch above the fireplace was the raven-sharp eyes of Richard Niebuhr. Richard's portrait was one of those that kept guard over all the action in this room. At prayer with the Methodists, at tea or whiskey with the Episcopalians. Sorry, Episcopalians. Or plotting a takeover with the Unitarian Universalists. Richard was watching it all, always, unflinchingly, unceasingly. Richard Niebuhr was the younger brother of the phenomenally popular Reinhold Niebuhr. Richard was a pure academic, Richard. However, while Reinhold took a more public place in the culture, both did their doctorates at Yale in theology, but they went in different directions. Reinhold served as a pastor of an inner-city working-class church in Detroit for years. Then he moved to teaching at Union Theological Seminary, which still today is known for rearing and cultivating some of the most activist ministers the world has ever seen. And he taught there at Yale for 30 years. Reinhold taught at Union for 30 years, while Richard stayed at Yale and taught there for 30 years. Reinhold was a superstar. Richard did pretty well too. So maybe it was fitting that his portrait hung over a gas fireplace, let's be honest. It was great. It was fine. It really was. He's fine. This month, we've been looking at courage and what it means to us. It's our monthly theme. In our reading by St. Mary of Unitarian Universalism, also known as the poet Mary Oliver. For those of you who don't know, there are actually 2 Mary Oliver poems in our hymnal. So when we say St. Mary, we mean it. And the poet shares the conviction of the kind of change that is so difficult for many of us to make. It's the kind of change that upsets the status quo, that alters the lives of the people we love and the people we care about, that might even threaten some of the ways we've been living. Her words: "The stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds. And there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. We meet here this Easter Sunday. It is the day when our Christian siblings remember the life that came to save the heart of the world. The tradition that arose from this event when the life of Jesus was saved was renewed to prove the truth of the scriptures that foretold the event stands in the rich and powerful tradition of the ways the primary, first, earth-based faiths were transformed, were transmuted, were transmitted to the ages that would follow. The very name Easter comes from Ostara, the name of the month and of the goddess of the spring season in the ancient earth-centered faiths of parts of what is Europe today. The time when fertility and new life were always celebrated and revered in the part of the world where the Christian faith took hold of some of the power it would need to spread across the globe as it did. Some Christian theologians who look at history would say that all of these ideas, these of rebirth, of transformation, of new life that were so abundant at this time of the year were only precursors, only preparing the way for the human mind to see and understand, to recognize the Easter miracle for what it was, the raising to new life of a God who died and would prove the miraculous power of love of that God to be true, to be real, and to be good for all ages. It is the victory of love winning out over death that still rings in so many of our hearts this morning around the world, and it should. For those of us here who remember and hold this day most sacred in this way, I wish to you a very, very happy Easter. Now, other voices, even in my own pious seminary, where Orthodox theologians follow your every move in coffee hour from atop a middling example of a fireplace, believed something a little different about the process of the Christian message into the world. As we said, Easter's literally named for a pagan goddess, and yet it is the highest holy day for the Christian people. Some historians, like St. Bede, recounted that feasts for Ostara and her name in her name were actually taking place in parts of Europe well into the 8th century, but eventually died out, he said, in favor of feasts celebrating Christ's rising from the dead. This wasn't an accident, friends. The early Christian church wanted to reach as many people as it could with its message. So when those proclaiming its message entered new places around the world, they often adapted to the customs that were there, that were being practiced locally wherever they went. Many of those customs received the epithet pagan, which might as well have meant hellbound in much of Christian history. Then, lo and behold, the Christian practices that evolved there would hold many of the pagan roots and practices of that area. The Advent wreath, the Easter bunny, take your pick. But with this kind of adaptability, the Christian message thrived. This is an early example of the field of theology that Reinhold Niebuhr would help to found. Am I boring you that much? I hear crickets. The field he would found would be called Christian realism. And this branch of theology is pretty much what it sounds like. Reinhold was influenced first by devout pacifists like Josiah Royce and others in the Fellowship of Reconciliation. But like many, the realities that led to the beginning of the Second World War changed him, changed the world, and changed his approach. He would break with those who fundamentally called for peace at all costs and only peace, and would proclaim that the imperfections of humans and society make building the perfect kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven In his words, impossible. In his time, Orthodox Christians, among them his brother, the raven-eyed Richard, felt that deeper and deeper study and interpretation of the Christian scriptures could help to finish what Jesus started by rising from the dead, bring about this new birth on into this universe in peace and harmony. So Reinhold's take was basically this. All right, guys, let's be real. Humans are not perfect, and groups of them are worse. This is literally his theology. So how can they build anything perfect? I'm summarizing many of his works of theology in a few sentences, all of which I commend to you if you'd like to have them fleshed out a little more. But this argument was not popular with many of his colleagues. It was pretty popular with people, though. His political and theological theory was that we have to do something very hard in order to balance the power of nations against the right of individuals. We have to get involved. We have to intervene and possibly, wait for it, compromise. Fundamentalists don't like compromise. That was not what the fundamentalists of his time, or of any time really, liked to hear. But in his view, he was only naming what religions had been doing for millennia. And the Unitarian Universalist faith, what we call the living tradition, is literally living proof. And so is this very day. You're all holding a lot right now, I know. And I know some of those things you're holding are things I handed to you. As many of you know, and my apologies to those of you who don't know, I will be leaving First Unitarian Church of Honolulu. I know this is hugely upsetting to some of you. I know it's confusing to some of you. It might be a pleasant bit of news for some of you too, just to be real. And all of those feelings are okay. We're going to talk more about the future soon. But it's the reality of what is happening in the coming months. I'm told by a lot of years of wisdom deeper than my own that the main things I need to be doing now is preaching, pastoral care, and making way for the ministry that will follow ours here. And that is a very realistic approach. And it calls to mind the realism, the candid and clear hopes for a religious movement encapsulated in the now famous words of Reinhold Niebuhr: "Give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things that should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other." This prayer is known to many in systems of recovery around the world in a form that's a little more simplified, called the Serenity Prayer. But this is the text that Niebuhr actually wrote, his first draft. In it, we cannot mistake the realism, the pragmatism, the inherent call he places before any who would pray that prayer. And it asks for the thing all need, who will change anything in the world: courage. For it is encouraged, balanced with acceptance, where wisdom may be found. I have a calling in the world that is taking me somewhere else. Reinhold's words would say that this is part of what realism tells us we must accept with grace because it cannot be changed. I mean, acceptance isn't easy. Don't get me wrong, it is not fun. It's a task. That's a task all by itself, but we don't do acceptance in a vacuum because we balance what we must accept with those things we can and must change. And what do we need to change things that we can? Courage. And I know the courage is there, friends. There are so many ways that you are taking a look at who you are now and who you want to be in the future. You've begun the literal groundbreaking of creating a space to welcome the youngest among us in real and meaningful ways. That took courage. It took tears. It took money. It took, what are those things? It took jackhammers. and really hard conversations and a lot of grit, but I call that courage. Not everything that's courageous needs a jackhammer, but some of them do. You've started to invest in the spiritual growth and religious learning of this place by bringing to our community a religious educator, Dr. Michelle, who we saw with decades of experience, who will help us to find an educator that can serve us all in the years ahead. That is going to take courage too, and you will have Dr. Michelle to help you. And there's even more growing up right now from your leadership here at the church. Your 8th Principal Task Force, in consultation with the board, is proposing removing the requirement of financial contribution to the church as a bar or a requirement to membership. Before this year's annual meeting, the church will hold a special meeting to vote on this change and to discuss it more fully. I encourage you to read the post in this week's bulletin from the 8th Principal Task Force. I'm guessing it'll be in next week's too. And to tune in to Pauhana on May 3rd to learn more about this proposed change. It's really inspiring work, friends. Let me just say, personally, I believe you are all so special. It's been the honor of my life to be your minister and to minister such a group of beautiful, charitable, kind people in a place surrounded by unsurpassed beauty. Ministering here has changed me, and I know it will change other ministers too. I hope this ministry we've been able to do together is something many of you have enjoyed, and that perhaps it's been transformational. What you have built together here, continuing the real work of dismantling systems of oppression and of white supremacy culture, is a precious gift to those who will serve here. It is so precious a gift that part of me feels it is wrong to keep it just to myself. Part of widening the circle, part of really building the beloved community means giving things to others, sometimes giving things up for others. Sometimes things we love. Church has another word for giving things up: sacrifice. Sacrifice means to render something sacred. It's literally what it means. Sacrifice is what courage demands so that we can know wisdom at last. And wisdom is really what is being asked of all of us, of all of you today. Pressed between what we cannot change and what we can, between acceptance and courage, is a space, a serenity, as Niebuhr puts it, which is wisdom. It is an act of wisdom to support this community through the next fiscal year ahead. Today, amid so much that seems to be changing, so much that is calling to the courageous parts of each one of you, is actually the beginning of our annual pledge drive. We just do it all in one day here, friends. Over the next 2 weeks, you'll be asked to let the stewardship team know how you plan to support the important work of this community over the coming year. I believe that supporting this community in this way is not asking you for courage so much as it is asking you for wisdom. This church is an embodiment of it, of wisdom. By its very existence in the world, at once, you shine a light on the things that are immutable, unchanging, unwavering, like compassion, justice, and joy, while also residing in the great traditions of our faith, seeking to alter or to better those things we yearn, that cry out for change. And between these poles fixed in our midst, there is a church, a congregation, a community here rooted that insists, that resists, and over the ages, yet she persists over the ages to prepare the way to accept and to welcome the children of this world yet to come. And yet she, the church, persists through troubles and through doubts, with courage to respond with reason, with care and truth in the face of a darkening reality in our world. And yet she persists in faith, in hope, in wisdom born of experience, born of all-encompassing love, this mother church to all her children. That, friends, that is wisdom. It's wisdom incarnate in the flesh. It is the greatest expression of love this Easter morning could ask of us, could ask of you. That is you. Not an empty fireplace, gaping out at a world that won't warm it. Not a wan imitation of fire entombed forever to be warm, but not alive, but a real, free place of fire, lit by compassion, fueled by justice, and lighting the way always to joy. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.